"You plan to trap me?" she whispered. Mafia boss smirked. "No. Sweetheart, I saved you first." The city of Grey Ridge was a creature of two distinct minds. Down near the river, the old industrial blocks rotted in the damp air, a graveyard of red brick and rusted iron that smelled of oil and forgotten history. But further uptown, a jagged spine of glass and steel pierced the heavy cloud layer, gleaming with the arrogant wealth of the new economy. It was a city that tried desperately hard to hide its scars under a layer of expensive polish. But the rain that hammered against the windows of the Harbor Line Logistics Tower tonight did not care about property values. It washed the grime from the gutters and the soot from the high-rises with equal indifference. Emma Lane sat alone on the 24th floor, the blue light of her monitor casting a ghostly pallor over her tired features. The office was silent, a cavernous expanse of empty cubicles and ergonomic chairs. Everyone else had gone home at 5 o'clock, rushing off to happy hours or warm living rooms. Emma, however, remained anchored to her desk, a junior financial analyst drowning in spreadsheets that refused to balance. She rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the headache that had been pulsing behind her eyes since noon. She had been at Harbor Line for 11 months, a job she had fought tooth and nail to get, believing it was her ticket out of the student debt that hung around her neck like a millstone. But the reality was less glamour and more data entry, fixing the careless mistakes of senior accountants who made 3 times her salary. Emma squinted at the screen. She highlighted a row of numbers, her frown deepening. Here it is again, she thought. It was the 3rd time in 2 weeks she had seen it. An invoice for $45,000, listed for shipping container maintenance, routed to a company called North Star Holdings. 10 minutes later, she found another invoice for the exact same amount, $45,000, paid to a different entity, Red Anchor Solutions, for warehouse structural repairs. She tapped her pen against her lip. The amounts were identical. The dates were identical. But when she cross-referenced the shipping logs, the ports of entry listed on the invoices did not match the declared cargo manifests. North Star Holdings claimed to be moving automotive parts through the Port of Newark, but the internal Harbor Line tracking number placed the container in a private shipyard in Charleston. It was sloppy. It was dangerously sloppy. Or it was intentional. Emma pushed her chair back and stood up, grabbing the printouts. She walked down the hallway to the corner office where the lights were still on. Victor Hayes, the VP of Operations, was packing his leather briefcase. He was a man who wore suits that cost more than Emma's car, and he had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Victor, do you have a minute?" Emma asked, hovering in the doorway. Victor looked up, snapping the gold clasps of his briefcase shut. "Emma, you're working late. You know we do not pay overtime for unauthorized hours." "I know," Emma said, stepping into the room. "I was just finishing the quarterly audit prep, and I found something strange. I wanted to show you before I logged off." She placed the papers on his mahogany desk. Victor glanced at them, his expression unreadable. "These invoices," Emma explained, pointing to the highlighted rows. "They are duplicates disguised as separate expenses. Same amount, same day, but the routing numbers do not make sense. And when I checked the shell companies," Victor held up a hand, silencing her. He picked up the papers, gave them a cursory glance, and then dropped them into the shredder bin beneath his desk. Emma blinked, stunned. Victor, those were the originals. They were glitches. "Emma," Victor said smoothly, walking around the desk to drape his coat over his arm, "we updated the ledger software last week. It has been ghosting entries. I have IT looking into it. But the shipping logs..." Emma pressed, her stubborn streak flaring up. "The cargo does not match the destination. If we get audited by the feds, It looks like a computer error." Victor interrupted, his voice sharpening. He stepped closer, his height forcing her to look up. "You are a bright girl, Emma. Diligent, but you have a bad habit of overthinking simple problems. Stop chasing ghosts. Go home. Get some sleep." He walked past her, turning off the lights in his office, leaving her standing in the sudden gloom. Emma stared at the empty desk, her stomach churning. She knew a computer glitch when she saw one. This was human error, or worse, human intent, 3 miles away. The atmosphere was entirely different. The Skylark Lounge sat atop one of the few luxury hotels in the downtown district that had managed to maintain its 5-star rating. The lighting was low, the jazz was smooth, and the clientele spoke in hushed tones that suggested old money and older secrets. Luca Romano sat in a booth near the back, nursing a glass of sparkling water. He did not drink alcohol when he was working, and he was always working. At 32 years old, Luca had the kind of face that stopped conversation, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from granite, and dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He wore a black dress shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, revealing the faintest edge of ink on his chest. Across from him sat Marco, his second in command. Marco was older, broader, with hands that looked like they could crush walnuts, and a face that had seen too many street fights. "Tell me something good." "Marco," Luca said, his voice low and rough like gravel. Marco sighed, sliding a manila envelope across the polished wood of the table. "We pulled the public records on Harborline Logistics. We had our guy on the inside try to access the back end. Nothing. It is clean on paper. Boss. Squeaky clean. They are moving standard freight, electronics, textiles, machinery." Luca stared at the envelope without opening it. He drummed his fingers on the table. "Bullshit," Luca said. "I know," Marco agreed. "We know Kovac is moving product. We know his supply of weapons and other things has increased by 40% in the last quarter. He has to be bringing it in somewhere. The Kovac syndicate does not have the infrastructure to fly that much weight in without raising flags. They need ships. They are using Harborline," Luca said with absolute certainty. "It is the perfect front, a legitimate company. Massive volume, trusted by customs. Kovac is burying his filth inside their legitimate containers. If they are cooking the books better than anyone I have ever seen," Marco said. "Or they are keeping a separate set of books entirely." Luca picked up his glass, watching the condensation slide down the side. He had taken over the Romano family business 5 years ago. After his father passed, he had spent every day since then legitimizing their operations, moving away from the violence and the vice, turning the family into a powerhouse of real estate and construction. But the Kovac syndicate refused to evolve. Worse, they had started trafficking in human misery. Women and children brought in from Eastern Europe. That was the line. That was where Luca Romano stopped being a businessman and started being a predator. "Find me the leak," Luca ordered, his tone finalizing the conversation. "If the records are clean, then someone at Harborline is making them clean. Find out who holds the eraser." Emma unlocked the door to her apartment, kicking off her wet heels with a groan. The apartment was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of the Thai food her roommate, Kara, had ordered for dinner. "You look like hell," Kara commented from the sofa, where she was watching a reality show and drinking red wine out of a mug. "Thanks," Emma muttered, dropping her bag on the floor. Kara poured a second mug of wine and held it out. Emma took it gratefully, sinking onto the worn cushion beside her friend. "Let me guess," Kara said. "Victor again?" "He shredded the evidence." "Kara," Emma said, taking a long sip, "I showed him proof that money is moving where it should not be moving, and he called it a ghost." Kara sighed, pausing the TV. "Emma, listen to me. I love you. You are the smartest person I know, but you have to stop playing detective. Harborline pays the rent. It pays your loans. If they want to be shady, let them be shady. It is not your name on the invoices. It is my login. Though," Emma said quietly, "I enter the reconciliations. If this blows up, and my user ID is attached to the approval of these glitch accounts, I go down. So quit," Kara said. "I cannot quit. I have $6,000 left on my car note and $40,000 in student loans. I need this job for 1 more year. Then keep your head down," Kara urged. "Do the work, take the paycheck, and ignore the rest. Seriously, Em. People who ask questions in this city tend to end up unemployed or worse." Emma looked into her mug. She knew Kara was right. It was the logical, safe advice. But the image of those identical numbers, $45,000, kept burning in her mind. Math was the language of truth. When the numbers lied, it meant someone was hiding a story, and Emma Lane had never been good at leaving a story unfinished. "I am going to bed," Emma said, standing up. "I have an early start tomorrow." The rain had turned into a deluge by the next evening. Emma left the office late again, her umbrella turning inside out the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk. She fought with the metal ribs, cursing softly, before giving up and tossing it into a nearby trash can. She pulled her trench coat tighter around herself and marched toward the bus stop. The city lights blurred in the downpour, red and yellow streaks on the wet asphalt. When she reached the stop, a group of grumbling commuters were already huddled under the shelter. "Bus is down," a man in a soaking wet construction jacket told her. "Big crash on 4th Avenue. Nothing is moving for at least an hour." Emma groaned. Looking at her watch, it was 8:30. She did not have the money for a cab, and standing here for an hour in the freezing rain was not an option. She mentally mapped the route home. If she cut through the alleyways behind the district that housed the Onyx Club and the old warehouses, she could shave 20 minutes off the walk and reach the subway station on 5th. It was not the safest route, but the rain was keeping most of the street trouble indoors. Decision made. Emma turned her collar up and headed into the labyrinth of brick and shadow. The alley behind the Onyx Club was narrow, lined with overflowing dumpsters and smelling of stale beer and rain. The bass from the club thumped against the brick walls, a rhythmic heartbeat that vibrated in the soles of her boots. Emma walked quickly, her eyes on the ground, stepping over puddles. She was halfway down the alley when the headlights swept over her. A black SUV turned sharply into the narrow space from the cross street ahead, blocking her path. The high beams blinded her, and Emma froze, throwing a hand up to shield her eyes. "Hey," she shouted over the rain, "you cannot park there." The doors of the SUV flew open. At the same moment, the rear exit door of the Onyx Club burst open just 10 feet to her right. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out, phone to his ear. It happened in a split second. The men jumping from the SUV raised submachine guns. The man by the door looked up, his eyes locking onto the vehicle. "Get down," the man roared. Emma did not have time to process the command. The air split apart with the deafening crack of automatic gunfire. Bullets chewed into the brick wall inches from her face, sending shards of masonry exploding into her hair. She screamed, dropping to a crouch, but her legs felt frozen. A hand clamped onto her arm, a grip like iron. She was yanked backward with such force that her feet left the ground. The tall man from the club door swung her behind a massive steel dumpster, pressing her back against the cold metal. "Stay down," he ordered. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. He stepped out from behind the cover, raising a handgun he had drawn from beneath his coat. He fired 3 shots. Pop, 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 steady and controlled, distinct from the chaotic spray of the attackers. Emma curled into a ball, hands over her ears. The smell of gunpowder choked the damp air, mixing with the scent of expensive cologne, sandalwood, and something sharp like citrus. She squeezed her eyes shut as more bullets pinged off the dumpster, ringing like bells. Then the man was back beside her. He crouched down, his large body shielding hers completely. He was not breathing hard. He checked the magazine of his weapon with a fluid motion. "You hurt?" he asked, glancing down at her. Emma looked up. In the shadows, his face was a collection of sharp angles and intensity. He had dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, and eyes that burned with a cold, lethal focus. Emma stammered. "Check yourself," he commanded, looking back toward the street. Before she could answer, tires screeched. The black SUV was reversing, peeling out of the alleyway as sirens began to wail in the distance. The attackers were cutting their losses. The man stood up slowly, keeping his gun lowered but ready. He watched the end of the alley for a long moment, then turned his attention fully to Emma. He holstered his weapon and extended a hand. "Come on, up." Emma stared at the hand. It was broad, with a heavy silver ring on the pinky finger. She took it, her own hand trembling violently. He pulled her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. "Are you shot?" he asked again, his eyes scanning her body for blood. "No," Emma managed to whisper. "I do not think so. Good, he said. A sleek sedan roared into the alley from the opposite direction, screeching to a halt next to them. Two men jumped out, Marco and another younger man with a scar through his eyebrow. Dante! Luca! Marco shouted, gun drawn. You okay? I am fine. The man, Luca, said, Kovac's heavy hitters. They knew the schedule. Marco cursed, looking at the bullet holes in the brick wall. Then his eyes landed on Emma. Who is the girl? Civilian, Luca said, brushing brick dust off his coat. Wrong place, wrong time. Emma took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. I have to go. I'm just going to go. She turned to flee, but her legs were shaking so badly she stumbled. As she grabbed the lapel of her coat to steady herself, her scarf shifted, revealing the plastic ID badge clipped to her blouse. Marco stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. He reached out and grabbed the lanyard before Emma could pull away. Hey! Emma shouted, slapping at his hand. Marco ignored her, flipping the badge over to read the text. Boss, look at this. Luca stepped closer. He looked at the ID badge dangling from Marco's hand. Emma Lane. Junior analyst, Harborline Logistics. The air in the alley dropped 10 degrees. Luca looked from the badge to Emma's face. The concern, or whatever passed for it, vanished from his eyes, replaced by a look of hard, calculating suspicion. He looked at her like she was a math problem he had not expected to find on a history exam. You work for Harborline? Luca asked, his voice dropping an octave. Yes, Emma said, backing up until she hit the dumpster again. I just work in accounting. Please, I do not know anything. You're in the alley behind my club, during a hit ordered by the people using your company to smuggle weapons, Luca said, moving into her personal space. That is a hell of a coincidence. Miss Lane? It is a shortcut, Emma cried, panic rising in her throat. The bus was down. Sirens were getting louder. Blue and red lights began to flash against the wet brick walls at the end of the block. Cops are 2 minutes out, Dante warned, looking at his watch. We need to move. Luca did not look away from Emma. He studied her face, her wide, terrified hazel eyes. The wet strands of blonde hair stuck to her cheek, the pulse hammering in her throat. Bring her, Luca said. What? Emma gasped. No, you cannot take me. Marco moved instantly, grabbing her arm. Get off me, Emma screamed, struggling. This is kidnapping. Help! Luca stepped in front of her, blocking her view of the street. Listen to me, he said, his voice cutting through her panic. Those men in the SUV? They saw your face. They saw me save you. In their eyes. That makes you an associate. If the police find you here, they will put your name in a report, and Kovac will find you by morning. If you walk away, you are dead. I will take my chances. Emma spat. I will not, Luca said calmly. Put her in the car. Marco opened the back door of the sedan and shoved Emma inside. She scrambled across the leather seat, reaching for the handle on the other side, but the child lock was engaged. Luca slid in next to her, slamming the door shut. Dante jumped into the driver's seat, and the car peeled away, disappearing into the rainy night just as the first police cruiser turned into the alley. Emma pressed herself against the door, as far away from Luca as possible. She was breathing in short, sharp gasps. She glared at him, fear and fury warring in her chest. You are crazy, she hissed. You are a criminal. Luca did not look at her. He was watching the city blur past the tinted window, his expression unreadable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone, typing a quick message. I am the guy who just kept you from bleeding out on the pavement, Luca said quietly. You kidnapped me. I secured a potential asset, Luca corrected, or a potential threat. I have not decided which one you are yet. Emma Lane. He finally turned his head to look at her. In the passing streetlights, his eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly dangerous. But we are going to have a long talk about Harborline. Emma stared back at him, her hands clenched into fists. She wanted to scream, to fight, but the memory of the bullets cracking the brick next to her ear was still too fresh. She was trapped in a luxury car with a man who commanded gunfire, like others commanded the weather. The car sped toward the skyline, leaving the old, broken part of the city behind, carrying Emma into a world she had only ever seen on spreadsheets, a world where the numbers were measured in lives and the red ink was real blood. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows with a brilliance that felt offensive. Emma Lane blinked her eyes open, shielding them against the glare, her mind momentarily suspended in that heavy, formless fog that follows deep exhaustion. For 3 seconds, she was safe. For 3 seconds, she was just waking up in a bed that felt softer than anything she had ever owned, wrapped in sheets that smelled of crisp linen and nothingness. Then the memory of the alleyway crashed into her. The gunshots, the shattering brick, the man in the black coat. Emma sat up violently, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was not her apartment. The room was vast, decorated in shades of slate gray and charcoal, with minimalist furniture that screamed expensive austerity. Beyond the glass wall, the skyline of Grey Ridge stretched out like a jagged map, but the angle was wrong. She was too high up. This was a penthouse view. She threw the covers off, realizing she was still in her clothes from the night before, her blouse wrinkled, her slacks stained with grime from the alley. She patted her pockets desperately. Empty. My phone. She whispered to the empty room. She scrambled out of bed and ran to the heavy oak door. She grabbed the brushed steel handle and twisted. It did not budge. She rattled it, putting her shoulder into the wood, but it was solid, immovable, and locked from the outside. "Hey!" Emma shouted, pounding on the door with the flat of her hand. "Let me out! You cannot keep me in here!" There was no answer, only the low, constant hum of the building's air filtration system. Emma backed away, her breathing coming in short, shallow gasps. She spun around, scanning the room for another exit. The windows were sealed. She was trapped, kidnapped by a man who shot back at hitmen without blinking. The lock on the door clicked. Emma froze, her hands curling into fists. She looked around for a weapon, snatching a heavy crystal water carafe from the bedside table. She held it like a club, backing toward the window. The door swung open. Luca Romano stepped inside. He looked irritatingly composed for a man who had been in a gunfight less than 12 hours ago. He had changed out of the coat and suit, wearing a fitted black t-shirt that clung to his chest and dark jeans. For the first time, Emma saw the ink, intricate, dark tattoos winding down his left forearm, disappearing under the fabric of his sleeve. They looked like vines, or maybe chains. He saw the heavy crystal carafe in her hand and raised an eyebrow. He did not look threatened. He looked like a man watching a kitten try to fight a Doberman. "Put it down. Emma," he said. His voice was rough with morning fatigue, but steady. "That is Baccarat crystal. It costs more than your car." "I do not care about your glassware," Emma snapped, though she lowered the carafe slightly. "Where is my phone? Why is the door locked?" Luca walked further into the room, kicking the door shut behind him with his heel. He did not lock it this time. He was carrying a tray with a silver coffee pot and 2 mugs. He set it down on the low table near the window before turning to face her. "Your phone is in a Faraday bag in my safe," he answered calmly. "The door was locked because you were hyperventilating in your sleep, and I did not want you wandering out into the hallway and tripping the motion sensors." "I want to go home," Emma said, her voice shaking. "I have to go to work." "You are not going to work," Luca said. He poured coffee, the dark liquid steaming in the cool air. "Call in sick. Tell them you have the flu or food poisoning. Just do not tell them you are here." "I am not telling them anything because I do not have my phone," Emma shouted. She took a step forward, anger overriding her fear. "Who do you think you are? You cannot just snatch people off the street. That was assault. That was kidnapping." Luca looked at her, his dark eyes narrowing. He crossed his arms over his chest, the muscles shifting under the black cotton. "That was a rescue," he corrected her. "And like it or not, you are involved now." "I am not involved. I am an accountant." "You are a witness," Luca said. His voice dropped, losing its casual edge. "The men who hit us last night? They work for Sergei Kovac. They are professionals. They do not leave loose ends. They saw your face, Emma. They saw me shield you, in their minds. You are not a random civilian anymore. You are leverage, or you are a leak. Either way, If I put you in a cab right now, you will be dead before you reach your apartment." Emma stared at him, the blood draining from her face. She wanted to call him a liar, but the memory of the bullet cracking the brick inches from her ear stopped her. The violence had been real. The way he had moved had been real. Luca sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. He gestured to the chairs by the window. "Sit down. Drink the coffee. We need to talk about Harbor Line. I have nothing to say to you," Emma said stubbornly, though she lowered the crystal carafe to the table. Luca reached behind him and pulled a folded stack of papers from his back pocket. He tossed them onto the table next to the coffee. "I think you do," he said. Emma glanced down. It was a printout of a ledger. Not just any ledger, it was the internal routing sheet she had been looking at yesterday afternoon, the one Victor had shredded. "How did you get this?" she whispered. "I have my ways," Luca said evasively. He sat down, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Harbor Line is moving millions of dollars in inventory that does not exist, or rather, the inventory exists, but it is not what is listed on the manifest. I know they are moving weapons. I know they are moving people. What I do not know is how they are washing the money so cleanly that the feds cannot see it." Emma bit her lip. She looked at the numbers on the page. Even upside down, the pattern glared at her. He watched her, his gaze intense. "You saw it, didn't you? That is why you were working late. You found the discrepancy. I am just a junior analyst." Emma deflected, crossing her arms defensively. "I check boxes. I do not know anything about weapons." "Don't," Luca said sharply. "Do not play dumb. It does not suit you. I saw your personnel file. You graduated top of your class. You are overqualified for the job you have, and you are too sharp to miss a repeating decimal error in a shell company transfer." Emma felt a flush of irritation mixed with her fear. He had looked her up. He had dissected her life while she was sleeping. "It is not a decimal error," she muttered, her professional pride winning out. "It is a volume displacement algorithm. They are splitting the payments into microtransactions and routing them through 3 different currency exchanges before consolidating them." Luca paused. A flicker of something like respect passed through his eyes. "Show me," he commanded. Emma hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the opposite chair. She pulled the paper toward her, her finger tracing the column of figures. "Here," she said, her voice gaining strength, "and here. See these timestamps? They are identical to the millisecond. That is impossible for manual entry. It is an automated script. Someone programmed the system to skim the money and reallocate it to these holding accounts, North Star and Red Anchor." Luca watched her hand moving across the paper. He was not looking at the numbers anymore. He was looking at her. He studied the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her hair fell over her shoulder. "So Victor Hayes is signing off on this?" Luca asked. "He has to be," Emma said, looking up. "I tried to show him. He told me to stop chasing ghosts." Luca's jaw tightened. "Victor Hayes is a middleman. He does not have the brains to build an algorithm like that. Someone gave it to him." He stood up abruptly. The movement startled Emma. He paced to the window, looking out at the city he was trying to control. "You are staying here," he stated, "until I find out who is pulling the strings at Harbor Line. You are under my protection." "I cannot just disappear," Emma protested, standing up as well. "My roommate will call the police." "Let her," Luca said without turning around. "The police will not find you here. And honestly, Emma, the police are the last people you want finding you right now. Half the organized crime unit is on Kovac's payroll." Emma stared at his broad back, hatred bubbling up in her chest. "You are just as bad as they are," she said. "You are keeping me prisoner." "I am keeping you alive," Luca said, turning to face her. "There is a difference." An hour later, the tension in the penthouse was thick enough to choke on. Emma had refused to eat the breakfast he ordered, opting instead to pace the perimeter of the living room like a caged tiger. She eventually wandered into the kitchen, her thirst winning out over her stubbornness. It was a chef's kitchen, all stainless steel and black marble, colder than a morgue. She found a mug and the coffee pot Luca had left. Her hands were shaking. The adrenaline from waking up had faded, leaving behind the jagged aftershocks of trauma. She tried to pour the coffee, but the pot rattled against the rim of the mug. Hot liquid splashed over the side, hitting her hand. "Ouch!" she gasped. Dropping the pot, it clattered onto the counter, spilling dark roast across the pristine marble. Emma swore, grabbing a towel, frantically trying to wipe it up before he saw. She did not want to show weakness. She did not want him to see that she was falling apart. "Leave it!" The voice came from the doorway. Emma jumped, spinning around. Luca was standing there, watching her. "I can clean it up," Emma said quickly, scrubbing at the stain. "I am not helpless." Luca walked over to her. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace that made the air in the kitchen feel suddenly thin. He reached out and took the towel from her hand, tossing it onto the counter. "Stop," he said softly. He looked at her face, really looked at her. His eyes dropped to her cheek. "You are bleeding," he said. Emma touched her face, wincing. A tiny shard of glass from the alley, missed in the chaos of the night before, must have worked its way out, or perhaps she had scratched it in her sleep. Her fingers came away with a smear of red. "It is nothing," she said, stepping back. "Stay still." Luca opened a drawer and pulled out a first aid kit. He did not ask for permission. He wet a sterile cloth with antiseptic and stepped into her personal space. Emma's back hit the edge of the marble island. She had nowhere to go. Luca stood directly in front of her, his large frame blocking out the light from the hallway. He smelled of soap and that same expensive, spicy cologne. "Tilt your head," he murmured. "I can do it myself," Emma whispered, though she did not move. He ignored her. He reached out, his left hand cupping her jaw to hold her steady. His skin was warm, his fingers rough with calluses but surprisingly gentle. Emma's breath hitched. Her heart did a traitorous double tap against her ribs. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. Luca focused on the cut, his expression one of absolute concentration. He dabbed the cloth against her skin, cleaning away the blood. The antiseptic stung, but the warmth of his thumb resting against her chin was distracting. He was too close. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. She could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jawline. She could feel the heat radiating from his chest. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the sensation of his hand on her face. The silence in the kitchen stretched, heavy and electric. It was a dangerous kind of silence, the kind where gravity shifted. Luca paused. His eyes moved from the cut on her cheek to her lips. His thumb brushed softly against her skin, a caress that had nothing to do with first aid. Emma felt a pull in her stomach, a sudden, sharp ache of attraction that terrified her. He was a criminal. He was her captor, and he was looking at her like he wanted to devour her. She jerked her head back, breaking the contact. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling. Luca's hand hovered in the air for a second before he dropped it. His face closed off, the mask of the boss sliding back into place. "Just cleaning the wound, sweetheart," he said dryly. "Don't flatter yourself." He tossed the cloth into the sink and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emma gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She was furious at him, but mostly furious at herself for that split second where she had wanted him to lean in. Later that afternoon, Luca called her into the media room. A wall of monitors displayed various feeds, security cameras from the building, news channels, and data streams. "Look at this," Luca said, pointing to the center screen. It was grainy footage from the alleyway, taken from a security camera behind the Onyx Club. It was black and white, rain-streaked, but clear enough. Emma watched herself walk into the frame. She saw the SUV turn the corner. She saw the men jump out. "Watch the driver," Luca said. Emma squinted. The driver of the SUV did not look at Luca. He pointed directly at Emma just before the shooting started. "They were not surprised to see you," Luca said, his voice low. They hesitated for a fraction of a second. "But look at the body language. That point. That is target acquisition." Emma felt sick. "You said they were there for you." "They were," Luca agreed, "but usually, if civilians walk into a hit, professionals wait or abort. They opened fire immediately, and that gesture. It means you were on the list, Emma. Maybe not the primary target, but a target. Why? Emma asked, hugging her arms around herself. I am nobody. You are the accountant who found the ghost money, Luca reminded her. If Victor told Kovac you were asking questions, well, killing 2 birds with 1 ambush is efficient. He turned to face her. You were not just in the wrong place. You might have been the bait to draw me out, or the cherry on top of the kill. Either way, Harborline wants you gone. Emma retreated to the guest bedroom, her mind reeling. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, trying to process the betrayal. Victor, her boss, the man who asked about her weekend, he had signed her death warrant over a spreadsheet. She heard Luca's voice coming from the hallway. He was shouting. Emma crept to the door, cracking it open just an inch. No! Luca roared into his phone. I do not care what the schedule says. Lock it down. He was pacing the living room, his back to her. Kovac is accelerating, Luca said, his voice dropping to a lethal growl. He knows we have the girl. He's pushing the shipment through Harborline early because he thinks we are going to crack the codes. Listen to me. Marco, put a detail on her mother's house. Emma froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Yes, her mother, Luca snapped, and her roommate. If Kovac cannot get to Emma, he will go after her family to flush her out. I want 2 cars on her mother's street, 24/7. If anyone so much as looks at that house wrong, put them in the ground. We do not touch families. Marco, you know the code, and we do not let Kovac touch them either. He hung up the phone, tossing it onto the sofa. Emma gently closed the door, her heart pounding. She leaned back against the wood. He was protecting her mother. A criminal warlord was sending men to guard her mother's suburban house because he had a code. It did not make sense. Nothing about Luca Romano made sense. He was violence and gentleness wrapped in a black t-shirt. Night fell, bringing a storm with it. The rain lashed against the penthouse windows, and the wind howled around the skyscrapers of Grey Ridge. Around 10 o'clock, the lights in the penthouse flickered and died. Emma, sitting in the dark guest room, sat up. The emergency lights in the hallway kicked on, casting long, eerie shadows, but the electronic lock on her door beeped once, a reset tone. She moved instantly. She tried the handle. It turned. The electronic system must have rebooted. This was her chance. She did not stop to think about the logic of running into a storm. She just wanted out. She wanted control of her life back. She slipped into the hallway. It was empty. She could hear Luca's voice in the living room, talking to Dante. She turned left, sprinting silently toward the service stairwell she had spotted on the floor plan earlier. Her socks slid on the polished floor. She reached the heavy steel door of the stairwell and pushed. It opened. She slipped inside, the air suddenly freezing. The concrete stairs spiraled down into darkness. She grabbed the railing and started to run. Going somewhere? The voice was deep and amused. Emma gasped, nearly tripping. She looked down. Standing on the landing below her, arms crossed, was Dante. He was chewing gum, looking completely unbothered by the blackout. Go back up, Miss Lane, Dante said. Boss said you might try to run when the power dipped. Move, Emma shouted. Panic rising, Dante just shook his head. Not happening. The door above her opened. Emma spun around. Luca stood in the doorway. He had been outside on the terrace checking the generator. His hair was wet, water droplets running down his neck and soaking into the collar of his shirt. In the dim, red glow of the emergency light, he looked terrifying. He did not look amused. He looked angry. Back inside, Luca ordered. No, Emma yelled. She was trapped between them. I am not going back in there. You are keeping me here against my will. Luca stepped onto the landing. The steel door clanged shut behind him, sealing them in the stairwell. He walked down the steps toward her, slow and deliberate. I am keeping you safe, he shouted back, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Why is that so hard for you to understand? Because this is a cage, Emma screamed, backing up until her shoulder blades hit the cold concrete wall. You are trapping me just like them. Luca closed the distance in 2 strides. He slammed his hand against the wall next to her head, boxing her in. Trapping you, he hissed, his face inches from hers. He was breathing hard, the smell of rain and ozone radiating off him. If I wanted to trap you, Emma, I would have left you in that alley. The people who planned that hit, they would have left you bleeding in the gutter like you were nothing. They would have stepped over your corpse to get to me. Emma looked up at him, her chest heaving. She could feel the heat of his body. He was overwhelming, too big, too loud, too close. I saved you, Lucas said, his voice dropping to a furious whisper. I dragged you out of the fire. And now I am the villain because I will not let you walk back into the flames? I never asked you to save me, Emma cried, tears of frustration pricking her eyes. You did not have to, Lucas said. He stared at her mouth. The anger in his eyes shifted, darkening into something else. The tension in the stairwell changed instantly. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was raw, magnetic energy. Emma pressed herself harder against the wall. She looked at his lips, wet with rain. She thought, for a terrifying second, that he was going to kiss her. She thought she might let him. Lucas seemed to realize it too. He froze. He looked at her fear, her confusion, and the undeniable spark between them. He pushed himself off the wall, stepping back abruptly. He ran a hand over his wet face, breaking the spell. Go to your room, Emma, he said, his voice flat. Dante, make sure the door stays locked this time. He turned and walked back up the stairs, not looking back. Emma lay awake in the guest bed. The power had come back on, and the city lights outside filtered through the sheer curtains, painting patterns on the ceiling. She was exhausted, but sleep refused to come. She kept replaying the moment in the stairwell. She could still feel the ghost of his presence, the heat of his body, the way his eyes had darkened. She hated him. He was a criminal. He was arrogant. He was holding her prisoner. But when she closed her eyes, she did not see the gun in his hand. She felt his thumb on her cheek, cleaning away the blood. She heard him ordering protection for her mother. She rolled over, burying her face in the pillow. She hated that she felt safer in this locked room than she had in her own apartment. She hated that when he was close. The panic in her chest didn't feel like fear. It felt like something much more dangerous. She was falling, and she had no idea where the bottom was. The morning light over Grey Ridge was deceptively bright, washing the city in a pale gold that hid the grime of the streets below. Inside the penthouse, the atmosphere was heavy, thick with the scent of coffee and the silent, grinding tension of two people at war with their circumstances. Lucas sat at the head of the long dining table, his posture rigid. He pushed a sleek silver laptop toward Emma. Log in, he commanded. Not to your email, to the back end of the Harborline server. I have routed the connection through a proxy so they will not trace the IP address back to this building. Emma hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She looked at him, searching for some sign of deception, but his face was a mask of grim determination. She typed in her credentials, the familiar clicks of the keys echoing in the large room. The Harborline dashboard loaded. It looked innocent enough, rows of shipping manifests, payroll logs, and vendor lists. Go to the archival access logs, Lucas said. Filter by your username. Last 6 months. Emma frowned. Why? I only access the current quarter. I have no reason to be in the archives. Just do it. Emma. She navigated through the menus, her irritation simmering. She clicked the filter button. The screen refreshed. Emma's breath hitched in her throat. The list was pages long. Hundreds of entries. User Elaine_04. Access time, 3 a.m. Action authorized transfer. Amount $80,000. User Elaine_04. Access time, 4:15 a.m. Action modify manifest. Container ID 884. Bravo. She scrolled down, her eyes widening with every line. There were timestamps for days she had been sick, timestamps for weekends she had spent visiting her mother, timestamps for holidays. This is impossible, she whispered, her voice trembling. I was not here. I did not do this. Luca leaned back, crossing his arms. He did not look triumphant. He looked resigned. I know you didn't, he said quietly. But according to the digital footprint, you are the most prolific embezzler in the company's history. Emma stared at the screen, a cold numbness spreading through her chest. She remembered Victor Hayes, her boss. She remembered his tight, polite smiles. She remembered how he would pat her on the shoulder and tell her she was doing a great job, how he would ask her to leave her terminal logged in so IT could run updates overnight. He set me up. She realized, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He needed a fall guy, Luca said brutally, someone clean, someone diligent, someone who followed the rules so well that no one would suspect her until it was too late. If the feds raid Harbor Line tomorrow, Victor walks away, and you go to federal prison for 20 years. Emma shoved the laptop away as if it were burning hot. She stood up, her legs shaking. I have to go to the police, she said, her voice rising in panic. I have to explain this. I can prove I wasn't there. I have alibis. Alibis do not matter when the evidence is baked into the server, Luca countered. He reached for a manila folder sitting next to his coffee cup and slid it across the mahogany surface. Look at this. Emma opened the folder. Inside were high-resolution photographs taken with a telephoto lens. The first photo showed Victor Hayes standing on a rain-slicked pier. He was not wearing his usual Italian suit. He looked nervous, clutching a briefcase. Standing opposite him was a man Emma had never seen before, tall, lean, with eyes that looked cold even in a glossy print. He wore a long gray coat and smoked a thin cigarette. That is Sergei Kovac, Luca said, the head of the Kovac syndicate. Emma felt her stomach drop. Her boss, the man who fretted about quarterly projections and coffee spills, was meeting with a crime lord. Victor isn't just stealing money, Luca continued, his voice hard. He's laundering it for Kovac, and he is using your name to sign the checks. Emma stared at the photo. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. She wasn't just in trouble with her employer. She was caught between a cartel and a federal indictment. I am calling Detective Ward, she stated, reaching for the landline on the wall since her cell phone was still locked away. Luca was out of his chair in an instant. He moved faster than a man of his size should be able to, his hand clamping down on the receiver before she could lift it. You are not calling Ward, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. He is the lead detective for organized crime, Emma argued, trying to pry the phone from his grip. He interviewed me 6 months ago during a routine audit check. He was kind. He listened. He gave me his card and told me to call if I ever saw anything suspicious. He was casing you, Luca snapped. Cole Ward is Harbor Line's pet. He has been on Kovac's payroll for 5 years. Why do you think no one has ever busted the docks? Why do you think every investigation into the trafficking ring hits a dead end? Because Ward buries the evidence. I do not believe you, Emma shouted, stepping back. You are a criminal. You are the one holding me hostage in a penthouse. Why should I trust you over a decorated police officer? Because I am the one who pulled you out of the line of fire, and Ward is the one who will hand you over to Kovac to be silenced. Emma glared at him, her chest heaving. She wanted to believe him. Part of her, the part that remembered the bullets in the alley, already did. But the other part, the law-abiding citizen who believed in rules and justice, could not accept that the entire system was rotten. I need air, she muttered, turning away from him. I need to be alone. She walked out of the room, leaving Luca standing by the phone, his hand still gripping the receiver, his knuckles white. Later that afternoon, the penthouse was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a gray, overcast sky that matched Emma's mood. She stood in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the marble sink. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her hazel eyes, and a bruise was blooming along her jawline, where she had hit the dumpster in the alley. The small cut on her cheek was red and angry. She looked like a stranger. She looked like a victim. A movement in the mirror caught her eye. Luca was standing in the doorway. He held a gel ice pack in his hand. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her watching herself. His expression was devoid of the arrogance she usually saw there. He looked tired, too. For the bruise, he said softly, walking into the room. Emma didn't turn around. She watched his reflection approach hers. He stood behind her, towering over her frame. In the mirror, they looked like a portrait of contrasts, her light hair and pale skin against his dark clothing and olive complexion. He held out the ice pack. Emma hesitated. then reached up to take it. But instead of handing it over, Luca gently pressed it against her jaw himself. The cold was shocking, but his hand was warm. He steadied her head with his other hand, his fingers resting lightly on her shoulder. "You are tough. Emma Lane," he murmured. "Most people would have shattered by now. I feel like I am shattering," she whispered to his reflection. "You are not," he said firmly. "You are bending. That is how you survive. Steel bends. Glass breaks." His eyes met hers in the glass. The air in the bathroom shifted. It became heavy, charged with a sudden, undeniable electricity. They were standing too close. She could smell the soap on his skin, feel the heat radiating from his chest against her back. She leaned back slightly, almost unconsciously, seeking that warmth. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You are a crime boss. Luca, you run numbers. You run territory. Why do you care about Harborline's books? Why not just let them steal?" Luca's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. His jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The hardness returned to his eyes, but beneath it, Emma saw something else. Pain. Old, deep, festering pain. "Because it is not just money," he said, his voice rough. "Kovac is not just moving drugs or guns anymore. He's moving people." Emma froze. "Women," Luca continued, his gaze drifting away from her reflection to some dark memory she couldn't see. "Kids. They bring them in shipping containers. False bottoms, no ventilation. They process them through the warehouses like cattle. Harborline's clean paperwork is the only reason Customs does not check those crates." He looked back at her, his eyes burning. "My sister," he said, "Sophia. She was 16. She disappeared 10 years ago. We found her 3 months later, when he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to." The silence that followed was heavy with horror. Emma turned around, breaking the contact with the ice pack. She looked up at him, seeing the man beneath the reputation for the first time. He wasn't fighting a turf war for power. He was fighting a war for redemption. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I do not want your pity." "Emma," Luca said, stepping back, putting distance between them as if the intimacy terrified him more than a gunfight. "I want your help. I want to burn Kovac's empire to the ground, and I need you to help me light the match." He turned and walked out, leaving the ice pack on the counter. Emma stood there, her heart pounding, the ghost of his touch still burning on her skin. Night fell over Grey Ridge, turning the city into a grid of glittering lights. Emma paced the guest bedroom. The revelation about the trafficking had shaken her, but her fear was a primal thing. She was trapped in a penthouse with a man who admitted to being a killer, waging a war against monsters. She needed an out. She needed someone with a badge. She needed to believe that the world still made sense. She remembered seeing a weak signal bar on her phone when she stood near the glass earlier. Luca had returned her phone for an hour so she could check her bank accounts. Supervised, of course. But she had managed to palm it and slide it into her waistband when he was distracted by a call from Marco. She waited until the apartment was silent. She cracked the sliding door to the balcony open. The wind whipped at her hair, cold and biting. She stepped out, shivering. She pulled the phone out. 1 bar. She typed a text message to the number on the business card she had memorized months ago. Detective Cole Ward, Harborline, Luca Romano. Penthouse at the Spire. Kovac involved. Help me. She hit send. The circle spun. Sending. Sent. Emma let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. 2 minutes later, the phone buzzed. "Sit tight, I am coming. Meet me at the Starbucks on 4th and Main in 30 minutes. Do not let him see you leave. Can you get out?" Emma stared at the screen. Guilt twisted in her gut. Luca had told her Ward was dirty, but Luca was a criminal. Ward was a police officer. She had to trust the badge. She had to. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and went back inside. Getting past Dante was going to be the hard part. She found him in the kitchen, eating a sandwich. He looked up as she entered, his hand instinctively dropping to his waist where his gun was holstered. "I need coffee," Emma said, making her voice sound thin and brittle. Real coffee, not this pod stuff. We have an espresso machine, Dante said, chewing slowly. I need fresh air. Dante, Emma pleaded, I am suffocating in here. Please, just walk me down to the shop on the corner, the Starbucks. You can stand right next to me. I just need to see people. Normal people. Dante hesitated. He looked at the clock. It was late, but the streets were still busy. Boss said you stay inside, Dante said. Luca is asleep. Emma lied. She hated how easily the lie came. And I am going to lose my mind if I do not step outside for 5 minutes. Please, I will not run. I just want a latte. Dante sighed. He tossed his sandwich wrapper in the trash. 5 minutes, he said. And if you take 1 step away from me, I am dragging you back up here by your hair. Thank you, Emma said. The elevator ride down was silent. When the doors opened to the lobby, the noise of the city rushed in. Emma felt a surge of adrenaline. They walked out onto the street. The air was crisp. The Starbucks was just half a block down. Stay close, Dante grumbled. Scanning the street, they entered the coffee shop. It was crowded. A line of people waited for drinks. I'm going to grab a table, Dante said, pointing to a corner spot where he could watch the door. You get in line. Do not move. Emma nodded. She got in line. She waited until Dante turned his head to glare at a teenager who was being too loud. She didn't run. That would attract attention. She simply stepped out of line, ducked behind a display of coffee mugs, and slipped out the side exit that led to the alley. Once she was outside, she ran. She sprinted down the block, her heart hammering in her throat. She flagged down a yellow cab that was idling at a red light. Get in, she yelled, banging on the window. The driver unlocked the door. Emma threw herself into the back seat. Underground parking garage on 4th and Main. She gasped, Go, please, just go. As the taxi pulled away, she looked back. She thought she saw Dante running out of the coffee shop, his face twisted in fury, but then they turned the corner, and he was gone. The underground parking garage was a concrete tomb. It was poorly lit, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry hornets. The air smelled of gasoline and damp concrete. Emma paid the driver with the emergency cash she kept in her shoe and stepped out. The taxi drove off, leaving her alone in the silence. Detective Ward? She called out, her voice echoing. A figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Cole Ward looked exactly as she remembered him, handsome in a rugged way, wearing a leather jacket and jeans. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Emma, he said, walking toward her. You are a hard woman to find. I escaped, Emma stammered. Luca, he has me in the spire. He has files. He knows about Victor and Kovac. Ward stopped a few feet away. He didn't ask if she was hurt. He didn't ask if she was okay. Files? Ward asked. What kind of files? Everything, Emma said, rushing to get the words out. The ledgers, the photos of Victor meeting Kovac. Luca says the company is moving people. Trafficking. You have to stop them. Detective. Ward nodded slowly. He looked around the empty garage. And the penthouse? He asked. What is the security like? How many men does Romano have up there right now? Emma paused. The question felt wrong. I do not know, she said. 2 or 3. Why does that matter? We need to get me to the station. We need to file a report. Ward took another step closer. His hand drifted to his waist, brushing back the edge of his jacket. We will get to the station, Emma, he said smoothly. But first, I need to know where Romano keeps the backups. Did he tell you where the server is located? Emma took a step back. A cold chill went down her spine. Luca's voice echoed in her head. Harborline's pet. Why are you asking me about the server? Emma whispered. Ward's smile vanished. His face went flat and cold, because Sergei likes to be thorough. He said, he reached for his gun. Emma screamed and turned to run, but her path was blocked. A black sedan had rolled silently down the ramp behind her, cutting off her escape. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. She was trapped. Ward drew his weapon. Get in the car. Emma, we're going for a little ride. Suddenly, tires screeched. A massive black SUV roared down the entrance ramp, smashing through the wooden gate arm. It didn't slow down. It drifted sideways, tires smoking, and slammed into the side of the sedan, crushing the passenger door. Ward spun around, raising his gun. The SUV door flew open. Luca Romano stepped out. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like the angel of death. He raised a handgun and fired. Bang! Ward's gun flew out of his hand, sent spinning across the concrete by a bullet that struck the metal slide. Ward yelled, clutching his hand, stumbling back. Marco jumped out of the driver's side of the SUV, an assault rifle in his hands. He trained it on the two men from the sedan. "On the ground," Marco roared. "Now." The men hesitated, looked at Marco's weapon and dropped to their knees, hands behind their heads. Luca ignored them. He walked straight toward Ward, who was backing away, cradling his numb hand. "You," Luca growled, aiming his gun at Ward's chest. "Romano!" Ward shouted, panic cracking his voice. "You cannot shoot a cop." "You are not a cop," Luca said. "You are an errand boy with a badge." Luca shifted his aim and fired a single shot into the concrete, inches from Ward's foot. Ward flinched violently. Emma stood frozen, trembling. Luca reached her. He didn't look at her with anger. He looked at her with a terrifying intensity. He grabbed her arm, not gently but possessively, and pulled her behind him. Shielding her body with his own, he looked at Ward, his eyes burning with cold fury. "Tell Kovac he missed," Luca said, "and tell him that if he comes near her again, I will not just take his shipment, I will take his head." Ward glared at him, sweating. "You cannot protect her forever. Romano, she's a loose end." Luca laughed, a dark, humorless sound. "She's not a loose end, Ward. She's the reason you are all going to prison." Luca holstered his gun, grabbed Emma's hand, and dragged her toward the SUV. "Get in," he ordered. Emma didn't argue. She scrambled into the passenger seat. Luca slammed the door and jumped into the back. Marco kept his rifle trained on Ward until the engine roared to life. Then he leaped into the driver's seat and floored it. The SUV tore out of the garage, leaving Ward standing in the exhaust fumes. Emma sat in the front seat, shaking uncontrollably. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. She turned to look at Luca in the back seat. He was watching the rear window, checking for a tail. "You were right," Emma whispered. Luca turned his gaze to her. His face was hard, but his eyes were weary. "I told you," he said. "You knew," Emma said, tears finally spilling over. "You knew he would betray me. Why did you come? You could have let him take me. It would have solved your problem." Luca leaned forward, resting his arms on the back of her seat. He brought his face close to hers, his voice low and fierce. "We had a deal. Emma," he said. "I told Ward, and I will tell you. If I wanted to trap you, you never would have reached him." He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder before he pulled it back, gripping the leather seat instead. "You are not a pawn," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Emma looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see a criminal. She saw the only man in the entire city who had told her the truth, and that terrified her more than the gunshots. Her faith in the system was shattered. Lying in pieces on the floor of a parking garage, all she had left was the man in the back seat. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded absurdly polite, given the violence of the last hour. Emma stormed out before they fully retracted, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor of the penthouse foyer. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to put space between herself and the man who was currently holstering a gun at the small of his back. Luca followed her, his stride long and heavy. He tossed his keys onto the entry table, the metal clattering loudly in the silence. "Do not walk away from me, Emma," he warned, his voice low and vibrating with suppressed rage. Emma spun around in the middle of the living room. The panoramic view of Grey Ridge twinkled behind her, a beautiful lie covering the rot she had just seen in the parking garage. "I will walk wherever I want," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You do not own me, Luca. You do not get to drag me around the city like a piece of luggage and shoot at police officers. I shot at a corrupt thug who was 2 seconds away from putting a bullet in your head," Luca roared back, abandoning his calm facade. He marched toward her, stopping only when he was a few feet away, his chest heaving. "Do you have any idea how close you came to dying tonight? If Marco had not cut that sedan off, You would be in the trunk of a car on your way to a landfill right now. And whose fault is that? Emma screamed, throwing her hands up. I would not be in this mess if you had not kidnapped me. I would be at home, safe, eating leftovers and watching TV. You would be dead, Luca bellowed. His shout echoed off the high ceilings. You think Harborline was just going to let you walk away? You think Ward was going to let you file a report? You are so naive it is terrifying. I told you Ward was dirty. I told you Kovac owns the precinct, but you had to play the hero. You had to test the fence. I was trying to survive, Emma yelled, tears finally stinging her eyes. She scrubbed them away furiously. I do not know your world. Luca, I do not know the rules. I trusted the police because that is what normal people do. And you are just as bad as they are. You manipulate everything. You control everything. You act like you are saving me. But you are just hoarding me like one of your stolen shipments. I am keeping you breathing. At what cost? Emma demanded, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, feeling like she was going to be sick. Everyone is using me. Victor used me to launder money. Ward used me to try and get to you, and you. You are using me to get to Kovac. I am just a pawn on a board I cannot even see. She choked on a sob. The adrenaline finally crashing, leaving her hollowed out. I am just a numbers girl. She wept, the fight draining out of her legs. I fix spreadsheets. I do not do this. I cannot do this. Her knees buckled. Luca moved instantly. He caught her arm before she could sink to the floor, but he didn't pull her up. He guided her to the expansive leather sofa, sitting her down gently. Emma buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, racking sobs. It was the first time she had truly let go since the alley. The terror of the ambush, the betrayal of Ward, the realization that her life was effectively over. It all came pouring out in a torrent of grief. Luca stood over her for a moment, looking lost. He was a man who knew how to break bones and dismantle empires, but a crying woman seemed to paralyze him. He reached out, his hand hovering over her shaking shoulder, then pulled it back. He clenched his fist, took a breath, and sat down beside her. He kept a careful distance, a foot of leather cushion between them, respecting the fear he knew she felt. Emma, he said softly. She didn't answer, just kept crying into her palms. Luca waited. He watched the city lights reflect in the glass, his jaw working, slowly, tentatively. He reached out again, this time. He placed his hand on the center of her back. He didn't rub circles. He didn't pat her. He just held his hand there, a heavy, warm anchor in the middle of her storm. Emma stiffened at the touch, then slumped, leaning slightly toward the warmth. I am not using you, Luca said, his voice rough with a confession he clearly didn't want to make. Not anymore. Emma sniffed. Wiping her face with her sleeve, she turned her head to look at him, her eyes red and swollen. What does that mean? She asked, her voice thick. Not anymore? Luca looked at her, then looked down at his hands, the hands that had fired a gun less than an hour ago. I knew who you were 3 months ago, he admitted quietly. Emma froze. 3 months? Harborline has been moving Kovac's product for a year, Luca explained. We were tracking the shipments, trying to find a pattern. But every time Kovac tried to route a payment through a shell corporation to pay his suppliers, the transaction would get flagged and reversed. It was driving him crazy. It was slowing down his operation. He turned his gaze back to her. It was you, Emma. You were the glitch. You were so diligent, so obsessed with balancing the books perfectly that you kept fixing the dummy accounts they were using to hide the money. You were rejecting their transfers because the math didn't add up. You were single-handedly disrupting a multi-million-dollar trafficking ring because you thought it was a clerical error. Emma stared at him, stunned. I was just doing my job. I know, Luca said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. That is what made it so interesting. Kovac wanted you dead months ago. Victor convinced him to keep you because you were the best analyst they had, and he thought he could control you. But I started watching you. You were stalking me, Emma whispered. I was assessing you, Luca corrected. "I needed someone on the inside who understood the code. I planned to approach you. I planned to offer you money or leverage to get you to flip on Victor. I was going to use you to get the evidence I needed to bury Kovac." Emma felt a fresh wave of hurt. "So I was a tool, just like I thought." "Yes," Luca said bluntly. He didn't try to soften it. "In the beginning, you were just a way to win the war." He shifted on the couch, turning his body fully toward her. His hand fell from her back, landing on the cushion between them. "But then I saw you in that alley," he said, his voice dropping to a rasp. The memory hung between them. The rain, the gunfire. "I was across the street. Inside the club," Luca said, "I saw you walking in the rain. You looked so stubborn, fighting with your umbrella. And when those SUVs rolled up, I didn't think about the plan. I didn't think about using you as an asset." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I just saw a woman who didn't deserve to die in the dirt." Emma looked at him. She saw the fatigue in his eyes, the lines of stress around his mouth. He was a violent man, a dangerous man. But he was sitting here telling her the truth when he could have easily lied to make himself look better. "I hate you," she whispered, but there was no heat in it. "I know," Luca said. He stood up, as if the intimacy of the moment was too much for him. I should check the perimeter, make sure we were not followed." He turned to walk away. Emma stood up too. "Wait." Luca stopped, but he didn't turn around. She looked at his broad back, the tension in his shoulders. She was exhausted, terrified, and angry, but beneath all of that, there was a humming wire of adrenaline that hadn't faded. She was alive. She was alive because he had come for her. She took a step toward him. "Luca." He turned around slowly. His eyes locked onto hers. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked. "In the garage. You had Marco. You could have just taken out Ward's men and left me. Ward wouldn't have killed me if you were gone. He would have just arrested me." Luca stepped closer, invading her space. "Ward would have handed you to Kovac by midnight," he said darkly. "And Kovac would have made you scream for days before he let you die. I wasn't going to let that happen." "Why?" Emma challenged, stepping closer until she could smell the gunpowder and expensive cologne that clung to him. "If I am just a failed asset." "Why risk your life?" Luca looked down at her. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up to her eyes. He looked like he was fighting a war inside his own head. "Because you are not just an asset," he growled. He reached out and caught her wrist. His grip was firm, warm, and electric. Emma didn't pull away. She felt the pulse beating in his fingertips. She looked at this man who had saved her life twice, who terrified her and fascinated her in equal measure. The anger was still there, but it was mixing with something else, something hot and desperate. She took a step closer, closing the gap between them. "Prove it," she whispered. Luca's eyes darkened. He tugged gently on her wrist, pulling her in until her chest brushed against his. He raised his other hand, his thumb brushing away a stray tear that still clung to her cheek. His skin was rough against hers. "Emma," he warned, his voice a low rumble. She didn't let him finish. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was all the fear and the fury and the relief of the last 24 hours pouring out of her. For a split second, Luca stood frozen, his body rigid with surprise. Then he groaned, a low sound in his throat, and surrendered. His hand released her wrist and slid around to her waist, pulling her hard against him. His arm was like a steel band, holding her so close she could feel the rapid thud of his heart against her own. Emma's hands found purchase on his shirt, her fingers twisting into the black fabric, pulling him down to her. They stumbled backward, their legs tangling, until the back of Emma's knees hit the sofa. They didn't fall, but Luca pressed her against the cushions, his body covering hers, shielding her even now. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry and frantic. His lips were demanding, tasting of coffee and danger. Emma opened to him, meeting his intensity with her own. She felt his hand slide up her spine, tangling in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. His other hand gripped her hip, his thumb digging in, possessing her. It was overwhelming. It was wrong. It was the most real thing she had ever felt. Luca pulled back for a breath, his lips trailing down her jaw, rasping against the sensitive skin of her neck. Emma gasped, her head falling back, her hands clutching his shoulders to keep her balance. She was trembling, every nerve ending on fire. Luca. She breathed. The sound of his name seemed to snap something in him. He froze. His face was buried in the curve of her neck, his breathing ragged and harsh. He stayed there for a heartbeat, 2, 3. Then, with a massive effort of will, he pushed himself up. He didn't let go of her completely. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. His hands were still on her waist, but the grip had loosened. "Stop," he murmured, his voice wrecked. "We have to stop." Emma blinked, dazed, her lips swollen and tingling. Why? Luca opened his eyes. They were black pools of desire, but there was a steel wall of restraint behind them. "Because you are scared," he said, "because you're full of adrenaline, and you are in my house, and you cannot leave." He took a deep breath and stepped back, putting a foot of distance between them. His hands fell to his sides. He looked at them, shaking slightly. "I will not take advantage of a prisoner. Emma, I will not be that man." Emma stared at him, her chest heaving. She reached out to touch him, but he took another step back. "Get some sleep," he said hoarsely. "We have work to do tomorrow." He turned and walked out of the room, not looking back, leaving Emma standing in the silence, her body humming with a want she didn't know how to name. 2 hours later, the penthouse was dark. Emma had tried to sleep, but her mind was a chaotic mess of images. Ward's gun, Luca's eyes, the feeling of his mouth on hers. She needed water. She crept out of the bedroom, moving silently down the hallway. She passed Luca's office. The door was slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled out onto the floor. She paused. She knew she shouldn't. Curiosity had almost gotten her killed once today. But she was Emma Lane, and she couldn't leave a puzzle unsolved. She pushed the door open. The office was empty. Luca must have been in the war room or his own quarters. His desk was cluttered with papers and devices. A tablet sat in the center, the screen glowing faintly. Emma walked over. She didn't want to snoop, but the file open on the screen caught her eye. It was a PDF with the Harbor Line letterhead, internal memo, Security Protocol 7 Alpha, from Victor Hayes, 2S. Kovac. Emma's heart started to pound. She reached out and picked up the tablet. Her fingers swiped down the page. Subject, containment of Analyst E, Lane. She read the text, her blood turning to ice. The subject is becoming a liability. Her pattern recognition is interfering with the routing schedule. Recommendation: utilizing her login credentials to fabricate an embezzlement trail. Set up as primary suspect for federal inquiry. She scrolled further. If subject attempts to contact authorities, initiate controlled handover to Detective Ward for transfer to Kovac personnel. Subject is disposable. Ensure no direct link to executive management. Emma gasped, a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet room. They had planned it. From the very beginning. Every smile Victor gave her, every performance review, every "good job, Emma." It was all a setup. They were fattening her up for the slaughter. She looked at the date on the memo. It was dated 3 weeks ago. But then she saw the second page, a frantic email from Victor to Kovac, dated the night of the alley ambush. "Romano has her plan compromised. If he turns her, we are exposed. Eliminate both." Emma's hands trembled. She lowered the tablet, staring at the wall. The betrayal was total. She had been a dead woman walking for a month, and she hadn't even known it. A shadow fell across the doorway. Emma spun around, clutching the tablet to her chest like a shield. Luca stood there. He was leaning against the door frame, watching her. He had changed into a fresh shirt, but he looked just as tired as before. "I told you not to go in there," he said calmly. Emma didn't apologize. She held up the tablet, her hand shaking. "You knew," she said, her voice cracking. "You knew they wrote this. I found it on Victor's private server an hour ago." Luca said, "I was going to show you in the morning." Emma walked around the desk, moving toward him. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "It says they plan to hand me over to Ward. she whispered. "It says I was disposable." "Yes," Luca said. Emma stopped a few feet from him. She looked at the document again, then up at his face. A terrible thought occurred to her, a thought born of fear and the cynical world she had been thrust into. "You said you planned to use me, too," she said, her voice trembling. "You said you were watching me for months." Luca straightened up, sensing the shift in her mood. "Emma, did you write a memo too?" she asked, accusation sharpening her tone. "Did you have a plan for when you were done with me? Were you going to hand me over to the police, or maybe just leave me somewhere?" She took a step closer, her eyes searching his face for a lie. "You planned to trap me too, didn't you?" she whispered. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Luca didn't flinch. He stepped in close, closing the distance she had tried to keep. He reached out and gently took the tablet from her unresisting fingers. He tapped the screen, turning it off, plunging the room into semi-darkness. He tossed the tablet onto the nearby leather chair. Then he looked down at her, his expression softening into something that looked painfully like affection. "You planned to trap me," she whispered again, tears spilling over. Luca smirked faintly, a sad, crooked thing. "No, sweetheart," he replied, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "I saved you first." Emma blinked, the words hanging in the air. "My plan changed the second I saw you in that alley," Luca said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over the damp skin. "I was going to trap an analyst. Instead, I saved a woman who was too brave for her own good, and I have been improvising ever since." Emma stared at him. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "I do not know what to believe anymore," she whispered. "Believe that I am the only one standing between you and them," Luca said fiercely, "and believe that I am not going anywhere." A sudden vibration buzzed through the room. Luca pulled back, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up his face, casting harsh shadows over his features. He read the message, and his expression hardened instantly. The tenderness vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of the boss. "What is it?" Emma asked, wiping her eyes. Luca looked up at her, his eyes grim. "It is Marco," he said. "We just got a decrypt on the chatter." He shoved the phone back into his pocket and looked out the window, where the distant wail of sirens echoed through the city canyons. "Kovac is moving the big shipment," Luca said, "the one that brings everything in, the weapons, the girls, everything." "When?" Emma asked. 3 days, Luca said. He looked back at her, and the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "It is going through the Harbor Line docks. If we miss this, he disappears underground for another year, and you will never be safe." Emma straightened her spine. The fear was still there, but the resolve was returning. 3 days, she repeated. "Likely the final move," Luca said. "It either destroys them or it destroys us." He held out his hand to her. "Are you ready to finish this?" Emma looked at his hand, the hand that had saved her, the hand that had held her, the hand of a killer who had chosen to be her protector. She took it. The war room of the penthouse was bathed in the artificial twilight of screens. In the center of the room, a massive digital map of the Grey Ridge docks hovered on a table-sized monitor, the layout glowing in stark lines of neon blue and warning red. It looked less like a shipping terminal and more like a battlefield, which, in less than 48 hours, it would be. Luca Romano stood at the head of the table, his hands braced against the edges of the screen. He had not slept. His dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark ink on his forearms, and his eyes were fixed on the layout of Warehouse 4. "We hit them at the perimeter," Luca said, his voice rough with fatigue but sharp with command. "Marco, you take the west gate. Cut the power to the external cameras at exactly 11 o'clock. Dante, you are on the river approach. If they try to load the cargo onto the barge before we breach, you sink the barge." Dante nodded, cleaning his weapon with a rag. "Understood." Emma sat in the corner at a temporary workstation she had set up. Her eyes burned from staring at the glare of the laptop, but her fingers flew across the keyboard. She was pulling data from the Harbor Line servers, using the backdoor access Luca had secured, tracing the spider web of shell companies that Victor Hayes used to wash Kovac's money. "I found another one," Emma announced, her voice cutting through the low murmur of the men. Luca looked up, his gaze shifting from the map to her. "Report," he said. "They are routing the insurance payments for the shipment through a dummy corporation in the Caymans called Blue Horizon," Emma said, spinning the laptop around so they could see. "But look at the beneficiary. It is not Kovac directly. It is a holding company registered to Victor's wife." Marco whistled low. "Sloppy. It is leverage," Luca corrected. "Kovac is making sure Victor has skin in the game. If the shipment goes down, Victor's family goes down with it." Emma turned the laptop back, her jaw set. "That gives us a paper trail. If I can link Blue Horizon to the main Harbor Line accounts, I can prove the money laundering wasn't my doing. I can prove Victor authorized the creation of these accounts 5 years ago, before I was even hired." "Good," Luca said. "Keep digging. Once we have the manifest, we hand it all to the feds. I want to be there," Emma said suddenly. The room went silent. Marco stopped cleaning his gun. Dante looked up. Luca straightened slowly, his expression darkening. "No," Luca said flatly. "I need to be there," Emma insisted, standing up. "Not at the warehouse. I know I cannot shoot a gun, but I need to be in the van with the comms equipment." "Absolutely not," Luca snapped. "You are going to a safe house in the country until this is over. You need me to verify the cargo manifest in real time," Emma argued, walking toward the map table. "Kovac changes the container numbers every hour. He uses a rolling encryption key. I saw it in the system. If you breach the wrong container, you give them time to move the real one. I can track the encryption live. I can tell you exactly which box has the people inside." Luca stared at her. He looked like he wanted to shake her, or perhaps lock her in the bedroom until the world was safe again. "It is too dangerous," he said. "It is necessary," Emma countered. "You said you wanted to save them. If you hit the wrong container, you lose the element of surprise. Can Marco decrypt a rolling algorithm in 30 seconds? Luca looked at Marco. Marco grimaced and shook his head. "I shoot things, boss. I do not do math." Luca looked back at Emma. She stood her ground, her chin lifted, her hazel eyes blazing with a stubbornness that matched his own. She was terrified. He could see it in the way her hands were clenched at her sides, but she was refusing to let the fear dictate her actions. "Fine," Luca growled, running a hand through his hair. "You are in the command van. You stay 2 miles back. You do not step foot on the pavement. If I say move, you move. If I say run, you run. Deal." Emma said. The hours bled into the night. The tension in the room was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. Marco and Dante had retreated to the kitchen to refuel, leaving Emma and Luca alone in the war room. Emma was hunched over the desk, squinting at a complex spreadsheet of routing numbers. The lines were blurring together. She rubbed her eyes, sighing softly. She felt a presence behind her before she heard him move. A wall of heat settled at her back, radiating from his large frame. "You are missing a decimal," Luca said, his voice low and right beside her ear. Emma jumped slightly, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't realized he was standing so close. "Where?" she whispered. "Here." Luca reached over her shoulder. He didn't touch her. Not really, but his arm brushed against hers as he reached for the trackpad. He leaned down, his chest pressing lightly against her back as he guided the cursor to a line of code she had overlooked. His breath was warm on the sensitive skin of her neck. The scent of him, coffee, sandalwood, and the metallic tang of gun oil, enveloped her. "See," he murmured. "That is the routing key. It repeats every 40 seconds. Emma stared at the screen, but her brain had stopped processing numbers. All she could feel was him, the solid, protective weight of him shielding her from the room, the way his large hand looked hovering over her smaller one on the desk. She leaned back, almost unconsciously, her shoulder blade resting against his chest. A shiver went through her, and she felt him tense in response. "Luca," she breathed. He didn't pull away. For a long, suspended moment, he stayed there, his chin resting just above her shoulder, his body curving around hers like a shelter. The war, the danger, Kovac, it all faded into the background, leaving only the electric pull between them. Then, slowly he straightened up. The loss of his warmth was immediate and cold. "Take a break," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You are practically asleep." Emma turned in her chair to look at him, but he was already walking toward the balcony door, putting distance between them again. Emma found him outside 10 minutes later. The city of Grey Ridge sprawled beneath them, a sea of indifferent lights. The wind was cold, whipping Emma's hair across her face as she stepped out. Luca was leaning against the railing, staring down at the streets. He didn't look at her as she approached. "I am scared," Emma admitted, her voice snatched away by the wind. Luca glanced at her sideways. "You should be. War is ugly." "It is not just the dying part," Emma said, hugging her arms around herself. "It is the surviving. If we make it through tomorrow, what happens? I cannot go back to Harborline. I cannot go back to my apartment. My life is gone. Luca, Victor and Kovac burned it down. We build a new one," Luca said simply. Emma looked at him. "You make it sound so easy." "It is not easy," Luca said. "It is necessary." He turned fully toward her, resting his hip against the railing. "My father ran this city for 30 years, he said quietly. He was old school. Gambling, protection rackets, unions. He believed that as long as you kept the violence between the families, it was just business." Emma listened. Sensing he was giving her a piece of himself he rarely shared. But the world changed. Luca continued. "The cartels moved in. The syndicates like Kovac's, they didn't care about rules. They started moving heroin. They started moving women. My father..." He looked the other way. "He said it wasn't our business what they moved, as long as they paid the toll to use our territory." His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "I couldn't look away," Luca said. "When I found out about Sophia, about what they did to her, I went to my father. I told him we had to stop it. He told me to know my place." "So you took his place," Emma whispered. "I took everything," Luca said darkly. "I forced him out. I purged the organization. I drew a line in the sand. No drugs, no women, no kids. If you want to move that filth through Grey Ridge, you have to go through me." He looked at Emma, his eyes fierce and vulnerable all at once. "That is why I am a target. Emma, not because I am a criminal, but because I am the wrong kind of criminal. I am the obstacle. And tomorrow, I am going to remove the competition permanently." Emma reached out and covered his hand on the railing. His skin was cold from the wind, but his grip turned instantly to hold hers, squeezing tight. "You are not like them," she said firmly. "No," Luca agreed softly. "I am not." The next morning arrived with a heavy gray sky that promised rain. The penthouse was a hive of activity. Men were checking weapons, loading magazines, and securing vests. Luca found Emma in the kitchen. He was wearing a tactical vest over his black shirt, looking every inch the warlord. "Change of plans," he said abruptly. Emma stiffened. "What? No, I am coming with you." "We agreed. You are going to the command van." "Yes," Luca said, "but I am not moving you with the main convoy. It is too obvious. Kovac will be watching the exits." He gestured to Dante, who was waiting by the service elevator with a duffel bag. "I am staging a kidnapping," Luca explained. "My men will drag you out the back service entrance, throw you in a nondescript van, make it look like you are being moved against your will to a secondary location. If Kovac has spotters, they will think I am stashing you somewhere to keep you out of the way." "And then?" Emma asked, wary. "And then the van circles back to the rendezvous point 2 miles from the docks, and you switch to the command vehicle," Luca said. "It is the only way to get you out of the building without painting a target on your back." Emma hesitated. She hated the idea of being separated from him, but the logic was sound. "Okay," she said. "Good," Luca said. He stepped closer, his hand cupping the back of her neck. He pressed his forehead against hers for a brief, intense second. "Keep your head down. Trust Dante. I will see you in an hour." He pulled away and nodded to Dante. "Let's go." Dante said. The kidnapping was convincing. Dante and another guard grabbed Emma by the arms, marching her roughly out of the service entrance. They shoved her into the back of a rusted plumbing van. One of them tied a blindfold over her eyes. "Sorry, Miss Lane," the guard muttered. "Gotta sell it." "I know," Emma said, her heart thumping against her ribs. "Just drive." The van lurched into motion. Emma sat on the metal bench, swaying with the turns. She counted the seconds in her head, trying to map the route. Left turn, right turn, slowing down for traffic. They had been driving for 15 minutes when Emma felt the van swerve violently. "Hey!" the driver shouted. There was a sickening crunch of metal screaming against metal. The van tilted, slamming back down onto its wheels with a bone-jarring thud. Emma was thrown off the bench, hitting the wall. "Contact!" Dante yelled from the front seat. "We have contact!" Gunfire erupted. It wasn't the controlled pop-pop-pop of Luca's pistol. It was the roar of automatic rifles, close and deafening. The van screeched to a halt. The windshield shattered, spraying glass into the cabin. Emma scrambled backward, ripping the blindfold off. The back of the van was a cage, through the mesh divider. She saw the driver slumped over the steering wheel, blood bright and terrible on the dashboard. Dante was returning fire out the passenger window, shouting into his radio. "Ambush! Sector 4! We are pinned down!" The back doors were ripped open. Emma screamed as sunlight and rain flooded the dark space. 2 men in tactical gear stood there. They were not Luca's men. They wore gray balaclavas and no insignias. "Grab her!" one shouted. Dante turned, trying to aim his weapon through the mesh, but a burst of gunfire from the street silenced him. He slumped back, his radio clattering to the floor. "No!" Emma shrieked. Rough hands grabbed her ankles. She kicked out, connecting with a jaw, but they were too strong. She was dragged out of the van, scraping her knees on the asphalt. She stumbled through the wet weeds of the roadside ditch, gasping for air. "Get off me!" she yelled, thrashing. A heavy gloved hand clamped over her mouth. A zip tie was cinched tight around her wrists, biting into the skin. She was shoved toward a waiting black SUV. As she was pushed inside, she looked back at the smoking ruin of the plumbing van. Dante wasn't moving. "Luca," she thought. A desperate prayer. "Luca." The warehouse smelled of old oil, rotting wood, and the foul, brackish scent of the river. It was vast and shadowy, the high windows painted over with years of grime. Emma sat in a metal chair in the center of the open floor. Her wrists were tied behind her back, raw and stinging. Her hair was matted to her forehead with sweat and rain. The blindfold had been ripped off 10 minutes ago. "So, this is the famous Emma Lane." A smooth voice echoed through the cavernous space. Sergei Kovac stepped into the light. He was an elegant monster. He wore a camel hair coat that looked spotless despite the grime of the warehouse. His face was lean, his eyes pale blue and dead, like chips of ice. He smoked a thin cigarette, holding it with manicured fingers. "And look who decided to join us," Kovac said, gesturing to the shadows. Detective Cole Ward stepped out. His hand was bandaged heavily where Luca's bullet had grazed him, or perhaps from the recoil of his own weapon. He looked pale and sweaty, his eyes darting nervously. "Hello, Emma," Ward said. "You traitor!" Emma spat. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "You swore an oath." Ward laughed, a nervous, twitchy sound. "Oaths do not pay the mortgage, Emma, and they certainly do not protect you from men like Sergei. We are closing the loop," Ward explained, pacing in front of her. "The official story will be tragic. A junior analyst, greedy and unstable, got involved with the Romano crime family. She tried to embezzle money, got caught in a lover's quarrel, and, well, bodies float, eventually." Kovac chuckled. He walked closer to Emma, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. He smelled of mint and stale tobacco. "You have been a thorn in my side, little accountant," he whispered. $38,000 in student loans. A mother living on Elm Street in a house with a leaky roof. You drive a Honda that needs a new transmission. Emma froze. "He knew everything. I know what you eat for breakfast," Kovac continued softly. "I know you like to read romance novels on your lunch break. I know you think you are brave." He straightened up. flicking ash onto the concrete floor. "We have been watching you for 6 months. We let you live because Victor said you were useful, but usefulness has an expiration date, and yours expired the moment you got into Romano's car." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was going to die here. Luca didn't know where she was. The convoy was heading to the docks. She was alone. But as panic threatened to swallow her, a memory surfaced. Steel bends, glass breaks, Luca's voice. She took a breath. She forced her spine to straighten against the metal chair. She looked Kovac in the eye. "You are right," she said, her voice clear. "I am useful. That is why I made an insurance policy." Kovac paused. He looked at her with mild amusement. "Is that so?" "I knew Victor was laundering money," Emma lied. She let the lie flow, channeling every ounce of confidence Luca had instilled in her. "I knew about the trafficking. Did you really think I was just fixing spreadsheets? I was copying them." Ward stopped pacing. "What is she talking about?" "A heavy encrypted file," Emma said, looking directly at Ward. 5 gigabytes of data, scans of the ledgers, photos of the meetings, audio recordings of Victor. "That is a lie," Ward snapped. "Romano has the files. Romano has copies," Emma corrected. "I have the master drive, and it is set to a dead man's switch." Kovac's amusement vanished. His eyes narrowed. "Explain." He ordered. "If I do not log in to a remote server by 6 o'clock tonight," Emma said, checking an imaginary watch in her head, "the file automatically emails itself to the investigative desk at the New York Times and the FBI Cybercrimes Division." The warehouse went silent. The only sound was the dripping of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness. "It is a bluff," Ward said, though he looked terrified. "She is lying. Are you willing to bet your badge on that, Detective?" Emma asked. "Or your life? Because if that file goes out, Kovac goes down. But you? You go down first." Kovac studied her. He looked for the tremor, the tell. But Emma Lane had spent her life staring at numbers, finding the truth in the chaos. She held his gaze with the desperate, icy calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. Kovac turned to his men. "Tear her apartment apart," he ordered, his voice cold. "Then tear apart Romano's office. If there is a drive, find it." "But the girl?" one of the guards asked, reaching for his gun. Kovac held up a hand. "Wait. If she is telling the truth, we need her alive to disable the switch. If she is lying, well, we have all night to make her regret it." He turned and walked away into the shadows, Ward trailing after him like a whipped dog. Emma sat alone in the pool of light. Her wrists were bleeding where she had twisted them against the ropes. Her whole body ached. She closed her eyes. She had bought herself time, maybe an hour, maybe 2. She started to hum. It was a quiet, tuneless sound, barely audible over the river noise. It was the only thing keeping her from screaming. She hummed, and she listened for the sound of an engine, for the sound of a heavy boot on concrete, for the monster who had promised to save her. "Please, Luca," she thought, "do not be late." The static from the radio was the ugliest sound Luca Romano had ever heard. It hissed through the command van parked near the docks, cutting through the low hum of tactical chatter like a scream. "Boss." The voice on the other end was wet and strained. "Dante, ambush, Sector 4. They hit the van. They took her." The world inside the command vehicle stopped, the digital map of the docks glowing with the blue and red lines of their carefully laid trap, suddenly meant nothing. Luca stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the console so hard the plastic creaked. For a second, rage flared in him, a white-hot, blinding fury that threatened to consume the oxygen in the room. It was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that carried the sickening weight of his own failure. He had sent her away. He had put her in that van. He had treated her like cargo to be moved, arrogant enough to believe he could control the variables of a war zone. Luca closed his eyes, inhaling a sharp, jagged breath. When he opened them, the rage had calcified into something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. "Hold the perimeter at the docks," Luca ordered, his voice devoid of any inflection. Marco looked up from his weapon check, eyes wide. "Boss, the shipment is 20 minutes out. If we leave—" "I said hold the perimeter." Luca interrupted, turning to the weapons rack. "Let the shipment land, let Kovac's men start unloading, but do not engage until I give the order. Half the crew stays here. The other half comes with me." "Where are we going?" Marco asked, though he was already grabbing his keys. Luca racked the slide of his handgun, holstering it with a sharp metallic click. "We are going to the river." The drive to the industrial district was a blur of gray asphalt and rain-slicked windshields. Luca drove the lead SUV, his foot heavy on the accelerator, weaving through the back roads of Grey Ridge with terrifying precision. The engine roared, pushing the needle past 80 miles per hour, but in Luca's mind, they were moving in slow motion. Guilt sat in the passenger seat beside him, heavy and suffocating. He had told her he was saving her. He had looked her in the eye, touched her face, and promised that he was the wall standing between her and the monsters. And then he had blindfolded her and sent her straight into their hands. Every outcome played out in his head, each one more horrific than the last. Kovac was not a businessman. He was a sadist who enjoyed the theater of pain. He would not just kill Emma. He would break her first, just to prove to Luca that he could. Marco, sitting in the passenger seat, checked the GPS tracker they had managed to ping from the attacker's vehicle before the signal vanished. "Turn right at the next intersection," Marco said quietly. "The warehouse district. It is the only place Kovac would feel safe enough to stash her while he oversees the shipment." Luca yanked the wheel, the tires screeching in protest. "You are blaming yourself," Marco said. It was not a question. "She trusted me," Luca said, his eyes fixed on the road. "She knows the risks," Marco countered. "She's tougher than she looks. Luca, it does not matter how tough she is." Luca snapped, his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. "She is a civilian. She balances books. She does not know how to survive a room with Sergei Kovac." Marco looked out the window at the passing decay of the old factories. "She changed you," Marco murmured, almost to himself. Luca didn't reply. He didn't have to. He knew it was true. 3 months ago, he would have sacrificed anyone to nail Kovac. He would have let the shipment take priority. But now, the thought of that shipment, the drugs, the money, the power, meant absolutely nothing if Emma Lane was not breathing. He pressed the accelerator closer to the floor. The warehouse was a cavern of shadows and rust. The sound of the rain drumming on the corrugated metal roof was deafening, drowning out the shallow breathing of the woman tied to the chair in the center of the floor. Emma sat straight, refusing to slump, though her shoulders screamed with pain. The ropes around her wrists were tight, biting into her skin, but the physical pain was a distraction from the terror freezing her blood. Sergei Kovac paced in front of her, his camel hair coat pristine in the filth. Detective Cole Ward stood behind him, looking pale and jittery, checking his watch every 30 seconds. "Tell me the name." "Emma," Kovac said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "I told you," Emma rasped, her throat dry. "I sent the file to a journalist." "Which journalist?" Kovac asked. "And do not lie to me again. My patience is thinning, and I have men 10 minutes away from your mother's house. It would be a shame if she had an accident while you were being so stubborn." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. The threat to her mother cut through her bravado like a knife. She needed a name. She needed a lie that sounded real enough to buy her time, specific enough to send them on a chase. Her mind raced, grasping for details. She thought of Luca's penthouse, the kitchen, the stainless steel fridge. There was a single magnet on it, a calendar from a local news station, probably left by a previous tenant or a cleaning lady. "David Halloway," Emma blurted out. Kovac stopped pacing. "Who?" "David Halloway," Emma repeated, her voice gaining strength. "He writes for the Daily Chronicle, the investigative beat. I met him 3 weeks ago at a coffee shop. I gave him the drive. He has instructions to release the password if I do not call him by 6 o'clock. Kovac stared at her, his pale eyes bored into hers, searching for the deception. Emma held his gaze, channeling every ounce of defiance she had left. She imagined Luca standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, telling her steel bends but doesn't break. Kovac turned to Ward. "Check it." Ward pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling. "I am checking. Halloway." "Yes. He's a reporter for the Chronicle. He did a piece on port corruption last year. Kovac hummed, a low, dangerous sound. It seems our little accountant has claws. Go, find this Holloway. If he has the drive, burn his house down with him inside. Ward hesitated, looking at the door and then back at Emma. What about her? I will handle her, Kovac said coldly. Ward nodded and hurried toward the exit, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. Emma let out a breath, her head drooping slightly. She'd bought an hour, maybe less. But as Ward's car engine faded into the distance, a new sound replaced it. It was faint at first, barely audible over the rain. The low rumble of heavy engines cutting off, the crunch of boots moving quickly over wet gravel. Kovac didn't hear it. He was busy lighting another thin cigarette, his back to the main entrance. But Emma heard it, and she felt a strange, calm resolve settle over her trembling limbs. He had come. Luca had come for her. She looked at her legs, then at the chair. She was not going to be a victim. She was not going to sit here and wait to be saved. The assault began with a concussive roar. The side door of the warehouse exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a breaching charge. Metal shrapnel clattered across the floor. Smoke billowed in, thick and gray. Gunfire erupted instantly. Kovac's 2 guards, standing by the mezzanine stairs, dropped before they could raise their rifles, taken down by precise, controlled shots from the smoke. Kovac spun around, dropping his cigarette, his hand flying to the pistol inside his coat. In the chaos, Emma moved. She threw her weight to the side, tipping the metal chair over. She hit the concrete hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact, but the force snapped the rusted back leg of the chair. She gasped at the pain, but adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. She twisted her body, dragging her bound wrists across the jagged, broken wood of the chair leg. It tore at her skin, but it also tore at the thick hemp rope. Emma! Luca's voice roared through the warehouse, terrifying and desperate. Kovac realized he was outgunned. He didn't run for the exit. He ran for Emma. He grabbed her by her upper arm, hauling her up from the floor with bruising force. He spun her around, pressing her back against his chest, and jammed the barrel of his pistol under her chin. "Stop!" Kovac screamed. "Drop the guns or I paint the walls with her!" The shooting stopped instantly. The smoke cleared enough to reveal Luca standing 20 feet away. He held a handgun in a 2-handed grip, aimed directly at Kovac's head. Marco and 3 other men flanked him, their weapons raised. Luca was breathing hard. His eyes were wild, shifting from Kovac's face to Emma's. He saw the blood on her wrists, the bruise on her cheek, and the gun pressed into the soft skin of her throat. "Let her go." "Sergei," Luca said, his voice a low rumble of death. "It is over. The shipment is seized. Your men at the docks are in cuffs. You have nothing. I have her," Kovac spat, backing slowly toward the metal staircase that led to the catwalks. "And that means I have a ticket out of here. Back up, Romano. Back up or she dies." Luca froze. His finger hovered over the trigger, but the shot was impossible. Kovac was using Emma as a human shield, his body almost entirely hidden behind hers. Emma looked at Luca. She saw the hesitation in his eyes, the torture of a man who was being forced to choose between his war and his heart. If he let Kovac take her up those stairs, she would never come down. She met his gaze. His eyes were dark, pleading with her to stay still, to let him handle it. But Emma knew the math. The angles were wrong. He couldn't take the shot. She gave the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "No," she told him silently. "Do not surrender." Kovac took another step back, dragging her with him. He shifted his weight, preparing to climb the first step. Emma moved. She lifted her right foot and stomped down with every ounce of strength she possessed onto the arch of Kovac's leather-clad foot. Kovac shouted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second as his knee buckled. Emma didn't stop. She twisted her body violently to the left, throwing them both off balance. Luca seized the moment. The second Emma's head cleared the line of fire. He squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed like a cannon crack. The bullet struck Kovac in the right shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed, his gun skittering across the concrete floor as he collapsed backward onto the stairs. Emma lunged forward, stumbling toward Luca. He was already moving, holstering his weapon to catch her. They collided with the force of a car crash, his arms wrapping around her, crushing her to his chest. "Look out!" Marco yelled. Above them, on the mezzanine level, a figure popped up from behind a crate. It was Ward. He had circled back. He raised his service weapon, aiming directly at Luca's back. Emma saw the movement over Luca's shoulder. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She shoved Luca sideways with a desperate cry. No! The gunshot rang out. Luca stumbled, hissing in pain as the bullet tore through the fabric of his sleeve, grazing his upper arm instead of burying itself in his heart. Marco fired a single, clean shot. Ward jerked back as if he had been punched, his weapon falling over the railing. He collapsed onto the catwalk, silent. The warehouse went quiet, save for the groans of Kovac on the stairs and the distant, rising wail of sirens. Luca fell to one knee, gripping his bleeding arm. Emma was there instantly, her hands shaking so hard she could barely function. She ripped the scarf from her neck and pressed it against the wound on his arm. "Oh God, oh God, you are shot," she stammered, tears finally spilling over, cutting tracks through the grime on her face. Luca looked up at her. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. He let out a breathy, pained laugh. "You have terrible timing, sweetheart," he choked out. "I saved you." Emma sobbed, pressing harder on the wound. "You were going to let him shoot you." "I was busy looking at you," Luca admitted. He reached out with his good hand, his bloody fingers touching her cheek. He looked at her with a reverence that shook her to her core. "You did not just save me from the bullet, Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me from him. From becoming the kind of man who would have sacrificed you to win." Emma froze. She looked at the man who had kidnapped her, terrified her, and ultimately walked into fire for her. Sirens were flashing outside now, painting the warehouse walls in chaotic strobes of red and blue. Luca leaned in, ignoring the pain in his arm, ignoring the shouting of Marco securing the scene. He brushed his forehead against hers. "Are you going to run?" he asked softly. "Now that you know exactly who I am, now that you have seen the blood." Emma looked at him. She saw the violence. Yes, but she also saw the loyalty. She saw the man who had sent guards to protect her mother. She saw the man who had refused to let her become collateral damage. "I am tired of running," she whispered. She closed the distance. She kissed him, slow and deep. It wasn't the frantic, adrenaline-fueled collision of the penthouse. It was a claiming. One of her hands cradled his jaw, feeling the rough stubble, while his good arm curled around her waist, pulling her gently against him. The world narrowed down to the warmth of his chest and the taste of him. The smell of gunpowder faded, replaced by the scent of him. His lips softened against hers, responding with a hunger that was tender and devastating. It was a kiss full of fear, relief, and a promise that terrified her more than the gun had. They broke apart breathlessly as the paramedics rushed through the doors, but Luca didn't let go of her hand, and Emma didn't pull away. The aftermath was a storm of paperwork and flashing lights, but for Emma, it passed in a blur. The evidence she had compiled, combined with the files Luca anonymously leaked to a federal task force, was damning. The rolling encryption key she had decoded was the smoking gun. Victor Hayes was arrested at the airport, trying to board a flight to Zurich. His wife's shell companies were exposed, their assets frozen. Detective Cole Ward survived the gunshot wound, but he didn't survive the internal affairs investigation. The contents of his phone, retrieved from the warehouse, linked him directly to the Kovac payroll. And Emma? Her name was cleared. She wasn't the embezzler, she was the whistleblower. The narrative shifted. She wasn't the villain. She was the junior analyst who had brought down a conspiracy. 6 weeks later, the air was crisp, smelling of autumn leaves and wood smoke. The newly refurbished restaurant, the Gilded Lily, was buzzing with activity. It was a legitimate establishment, owned by the Romano Group, serving handmade pasta and vintage wines. Emma sat at a corner table near the back, nursing a glass of red wine. She wore a soft cream dress, the bruises on her body long faded, though the memories were etched into her mind forever. Luca approached the table. He looked different. The black tactical gear was gone, replaced by a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked like a businessman. He looked like a man who was sleeping at night. "How is the renovations coming along?" Emma asked as he sat down across from her. "We are under budget and ahead of schedule," Luca said, a small smirk playing on his lips. "It is amazing what happens when you do not have to bribe the building inspector." Emma smiled. She reached across the table, her fingers intertwining with his, under the tablecloth. His knee brushed against hers, a warm, constant pressure. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. Luca looked around the room. He looked at the families eating dinner. He looked at the lack of armed guards at the door. "I am peaceful," he said. "That is better than happy." He looked back at her, his thumb running over her knuckles. "And you? Do you miss the excitement?" Emma laughed softly. "I have had enough excitement for one lifetime. Luca, I am perfectly content with boring." They finished their wine in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between two people who have seen the worst of each other and chosen to stay. As the restaurant began to empty, Luca led her up to the rooftop terrace. The city of Grey Ridge sprawled below them, the same view they had shared from the penthouse. But it looked different now. The fear was gone. The lights didn't look like warnings anymore. They looked like stars. Luca stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, pulling her back against his chest. Emma leaned into him, closing her eyes, feeling safe, truly safe. His world was still dangerous. There would always be rivals, always be threats, but she wasn't trapped in it. She was standing in it by choice. "I never asked you," Luca murmured into her ear, his voice low and vibrating through her spine. "Back in the office, when you found that memo, you asked if I planned to trap you." Emma turned in his arms, looking up at him. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. "I remember," she said. "You planned to trap me?" she whispered, repeating the words that had started it all. Luca smiled, a genuine, open expression that reached his eyes. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers. "No, sweetheart," he replied, sealing their future with a kiss. "I saved you first. Thank you so much for listening to You Planned to Trap Me," she whispered. Mafia boss smirked. "No, sweetheart, I saved you first." I hope you enjoyed Emma and Luca's journey from enemies to lovers. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me which country you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed this story, please do not forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more intense, emotional, and thrilling tales. Share your thoughts on the ending in the comments in English. I read every single one. Until next time.